This is TWiT.
We are back from the break, and we are joined by Mark Gurman of Bloomberg. Welcome back to the show, Mark.
Thanks for having me. How you doing, man?
Doing well, and I hope you are well too. I know that you are moving on up in the world, so congratulations on that. I think it was on MacBreak Weekly that they first sort of celebrated your new role.
Well, that's kind. Thank you.
Yeah, congratulations. Now, this, of course, is our opportunity to talk about what's new for Apple. And you had a very in-depth piece about how Apple is working on a revamp of the software for the iPhone, iPad, and Mac. Can you give us a brief little introduction to that before we get into things?
Yeah, you're right. This year, as part of iOS 19, iPadOS 19, and macOS 16, Apple will be undertaking its biggest revamps to iOS software, to macOS software, really in Apple's modern history. This will be the biggest change ever to iPad software and iPhone software, and the biggest change since the transition to Mac OS 10 over 20 years ago for the Mac. Full redesigns, new everything across the board. The way you use the devices are going to change completely. It's a fundamental reorganization of how these products work for a new generation, for an AI generation. And so this is really exciting stuff. By the way, I got the new MacBook Air yesterday. This is the blue one. It's really not blue. I was
going to say, where's the blue?
I figured I'd point that out because I know your viewers are really interested.
Oh, yeah.
In this stuff. So.
Absolutely. So let's then, this is interesting because as you mentioned the last time that there was this big of a change. I remember with iOS 7 and the changes there, it was kind of shocking for some people. Do we know sort of internally what is spurring this complete overhaul of the system? Is it just time? Is the design language of the world changing? Because before it was kind of about moving out of the faux Corinthian leathers and that sort of design language into something that was a little bit more, I guess, digital focused. It was the interface is the interface. We don't need to make it resemble something physical. What's going on this time?
So the iOS 7 transition, for all intents and purposes, was a fresh coat of paint, right? They changed the way the interface looks. This is not only going to change how the interface looks, but it's going to change how the interface works, down to buttons, menus. What is a button? What do panels look like? There's going to be a lot of influence from VisionOS on both macOS and iOS/iPadOS. The thinking here is how to make the user interface simpler, easier to use, and more intuitive for a new generation of users, for a generation of users that want to make the phone and the iPad and the Mac more of an extension of who they are, for people who want to use multiple Apple devices and move between them with more cohesiveness and more simplicity. And so that's exactly what they're doing here. They're trying to appeal not only to the 2 billion plus devices in use today, but they want to be able to get the next 2 billion by making things a lot simpler, a lot more intuitive, a lot easier to use. And they want to basically go back to the core competency, right? They're not doing well in AI, but you know where Apple has succeeded over the last 40 years? Slick user interfaces. And that's exactly what Apple is going to try to promote here.
That's interesting because I've always thought or felt that the narrative was kind of, if you want to tinker, if you want to play around, if you want to change things up, you go Android. And if you're trying to get a person to just feel comfortable with an operating system, it is iOS, it is iPhone. But over time, yeah, things have gotten a lot more complicated. You swipe down Control Center and there's 50,000 different buttons you can press and move things around. And jiggle mode has changed over time, and you see a lot of complaints there. When it comes to
let's just be honest here. Let's be honest here. The interfaces have become bloated, right? They have become filled with stuff. They've been adding new features on top of the existing user interface paradigms and the way these interfaces work for years, for decades even at this point for some of these operating systems. But they've never taken a step back and said, instead of tacking on everything on top of each other, let's take a step back and see how can we rearrange all of this for it to work and be more intuitive, be more natural, be easier to use. Go back to that day one of the iPhone where it was very simple and you knew it was going to work. So they're basically starting over on what an interface should look like for a phone, for a tablet, and for a Mac. and they want them all to work more similarly in a more cohesive manner.
Do you know if these design changes come at the expense of focus on Apple's AI intentions? Of course, there's been a lot of reports, and Apple itself said, hey, we're delaying the smarter Siri for who knows how long. Or is this kind of like a look over here moment of here's what you can have in the meantime?
They're two separate things. Work on this redesign and the decisions from the executives to go down this path started even before Apple's push to develop Apple Intelligence. So this has been a 2, 3, 4 year project. Yeah, it's been a really big priority for people I've talked to within Apple's user interface design group.
Understood. And now you talked about in the piece that VisionOS is sort of inspiration for the push for this slicker interface. How much do you know about what we can look to there as the means of understanding what we should expect for the rest of the OSs?
Yeah, no, I've obviously been a big VisionOS user. I've seen iOS 19, I've seen macOS 16. So I have a good handle on how these things are designed and how they're going to work. The important thing to note here is they're going to pick and choose their spots. They're going to take user interface elements like new translucent menu items, new panels, new button sections, that side panel on the side of the VisionOS apps that they have, like the menu controls. They're going to take what makes sense and apply it to those operating systems. So you're not going to see a direct copy the way you launch your home grid in VisionOS and just copy that for iOS and macOS. They're going to take what makes sense. You have to understand still Mac and iPad and iPhone, those are 2D user interfaces. There's a lot of the user interface that went into VisionOS specific to that 3D, to that augmented reality environment. So they're going to pick and choose their spots, but you're going to see more cohesiveness across the operating systems. You use VisionOS and the user interface paradigms just feel so much more modern and advanced than you're getting on Mac and iPhone. And so it's about bridging that gap.
Understood. I guess the last thing I'll ask you is when it comes to these changes, of course, everybody talks about change being a good thing and change being something they can handle, but then change happens and they are frustrated. With changes like this, we saw the introduction of system preferences becoming system settings, and that kind of falling more in line with what we see on iOS, iPadOS. What is Apple prepared for the response to these changes? I mean, it sounds like it's going to be a shocking change in terms of how much things are going to be adjusted.
It's going to be a shocking change. You've seen the iOS 18 Photos revamp. That's one app, right? Albeit a popular one. But they changed one app and there were a bunch of people who were upset about it. It didn't turn into a crisis like this AI stuff. But this is, I don't think there's going to be a backlash. I think people are actually going to like it, if I'm being honest with you. I don't find it polarizing at all.
Okay, that's good to know. Well,
but just because the design is not polarizing doesn't mean it's going to be hugely different and annoy a lot of people, right? I think both can be true. I think people are going to love it, but it's going to take people a while to get used to. It's not like they're making it worse, which I think with the Photos app, they actually made it worse, right? Mm-hmm. So the issue is going to be in the adjustment period, not in the substance. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, you've got to learn the new way of doing things, but the new way of doing things is better from the old way of doing things.
That's my personal take, right? Like, I'm not sure everyone is going to feel that way, but in my take, like I remember when I got the original iPhone, it took you 2 weeks to learn how to type on that thing, to learn that interface. And so you're going to see that learning curve again. And through every Apple product, people have made that learning curve. Even the watch, that was a new interface. So it's just going to be like that.
That makes sense. Well, I guess then the true last thing is with this shift in the design, does this better integrate with Apple Intelligence in terms of having that? Because right now it does feel like many of these things are kind of tacked on, layered over the top. You communicate with Siri and it's this rectangle around the outside. It is part of this design overhaul, because you said they're kind of two separate groups. Will we feel more of an integration when it comes to writing tools and all of these other Apple Intelligence features that are currently here?
That's the idea, but I think that's going to take a while. I think first and foremost, they want to get the design stuff out and then figure out how to integrate Apple Intelligence more deeply.
Makes sense. Well, Mark Gurman, I want to thank you so much for taking some time to join us today. Of course, they can head over to Bloomberg.com, they being our listeners, to check out your work. Is there anywhere else they should follow along to keep up with what you've got?
Yeah, I'm on all the socials at Mark Gurman. Micah, always such a pleasure to be on here with you and the team. So thanks again and have me on soon.